little bit about why it makes sense to have an Oxford West End programme manager from Regen and Economy supporting us on leading the Oxford Station Master Plan. And really look forward to your questions and all your experience, and keen to make connections, because while we're competing in some ways for resources along our line, it's also really important that we promote the benefits of the region that will come through East West Rail and the strong ecosystem we have. So really great to be connected, and please do get in touch after this session if you find an opportunity for sort of synergies or strengthening how we work together. I will just, do we have the poll completed, Maura? Is it worth sharing any insights?
Not at the moment, because lots of people are telling me they can't access the poll when they comes to the meeting. Okay. So I'm trying to work out how I can get all their information. We have got some information in the poll if you look at it. No problem. Well, let's not dwell on the poll now, but maybe later we could, before the Q&A, it might be quite interesting to sort of point some highlights from that and people can then fill it in. So I hope now I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yep, yeah.
Brilliant. I'll move us on as we've been through the agenda. So, as I mentioned, my key focus Oxford West End. I'm the programme manager for this area, coming forward a new city centre neighbourhood and innovation district with the station quarter at its heart. My work is resourced by a collective of landowners, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, coordinated by the City Council. And we have a landowner group and a strategic board, which enables all the authorities, local and national, to coordinate with the developers so we can maximise this opportunity. So we work together to do all the bits that are needed beyond the sum of our parts. So each of the individual sites have their own master plans coming forward. And this work is bridging that. And we're also sort of promoting the Oxford West End brand, I suppose, with a new website that we launched in January 2024. So please do check that out. And that supports a lot of work that's been happening in policy. I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but I will include it when we circulate the slides later. But just to acknowledge that the West End has long been in policy with a big driver, because it's a really sustainable location for commercial growth, but also for housing in a city centre location. And the station plays a really key role in that, in order to enable people to travel sustainably and also potentially commute from quite long distances, because there's going to be a huge amount of wealth of talent that are going to need to work in this area, as well as local people. So in terms of a little bit of an update, the latest local plan, which we've consulted on, which is in draft at the moment, the Local Plan 2040, has identified Oxford West End, which is the areas highlighted in yellow in the circle on the right, as well as the Botley Retail Park as an area of focus, with at least 115,000 square metres of additional floor space proposed between the two. Although I would say that is fairly sort of conservative balance between landowners' ambitions and what can come forward in this plan period. And there is scope for a lot more commercial development to come forward within these sites if they are sort of more dense, depending on how their master planning plays through. So we've recently had Mission Street join our landowner group, which has been established for a while, and they're bringing forward the two sites in the left-hand circle, Inventor and Fabrica, with the Inventor Lab now available. Now, this was a retail park historically, and they've done some really innovative work to convert retail units, such as the likes of sort of DFS or, you know, your big kind of retail units, into other uses, and there are other sites to follow in this area. So we are expecting more landowners to join across both the Botley Retail Park area and the West End. So this map will become more yellow over time. The new local plan was also proposed we extend our city centre boundary to include Oseney Mead, which is the area big here on the bottom left. And this is currently an industrial site, but will become much more of a sort of city centre feel. It is being brought forward by predominantly Oxford University, but there are other landowners, but it's not intended to be like a university campus or a science park. It will have an urban grain and very much feel part of the city centre. So we're expecting a big change in how this area of the city feels. Becoming a more city centre location, but really a really nice sort of green and blue location as well. As you can see, it's surrounded by green belts and rivers, so very attractive area with that ingrained in the design. So all the yellow sites, all the big yellow sites are in either sort of master planning or in pre-apps at the moment, and there are others coming forward. And the station, as you can see, is really central to all of this. And our current city centre, if you don't know Oxford, is sort of just off to the right of the map, very close by. And on our website, we're promoting a number of enabling infrastructure. A lot of these are citywide or indeed kind of regional. So we're promoting all of these because they play such a big role in the way that they will support the West End and this global innovation ecosystem and sustainable commuting. So we've got Oxford Station, which you may have heard about, where there's some work underway at the moment, where we've got a new platform and Western entrance to come and some great improvements along one of the main roads into the city for cycling and walking. And then the next piece of work is an Oxford Station master plan, which looks at an option study for a wider area. I'm going to talk a little bit about that briefly, and that's actually being supported by some voluntary contributions from our West End landowners in order to do a feasibility study to appraise options, because we really want to accelerate this coming forward. It plays such a key role in making sure it's a successful place, as well as commuting and transport benefits. And we have a West End strategic board that is really supporting and escalating the case for the station master plan, for the Cowley branch line as well, which Rui will tell you about, and for East West Rail in order to enable that effective movement. So the station master plan, this is a joint project between the City, County and Network Rail. We're working together with some slightly different agendas, but coming together to bring them forward collectively. And as I mentioned, I am the project manager for this, but luckily bringing all of their expertise and different specialisms. And we're really looking to accelerate this as a priority because it's strong in all of our policies as are listed here. And Weston Williamson were appointed as lead architects in a multidisciplinary team. They're not going to be talking about that work today. I'm going to give a little introduction, but they've taken us forward to a sort of REBA 1 option study that's really had a driver to look at whether we can deliver this master plan in a sooner time frame. So just briefly on the context, because it is a little bit complicated. So at Oxford, we have some work that's coming forward at the moment, as I mentioned, for a new Western entrance. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but on the opposite side of the tracks to our current main station is a new Western entrance coming forward and a new track improvement. And that enables more trains to pass through Oxford and introduces East West Rail services, which is fantastic and gives another entrance, which adds some resilience to the station. However, we are very, very, very keen to have a master plan for the main station, which is very old and tired. And also there is a Network Rail-led plan for an extension of our platform 1, which would actually cut through the main station building. And that is needed because of a bottleneck in the Oxford area for passenger and freight trains, so limits expansion of rail services. And that's in the RNEP, but not yet funded. So our master plan is very much responding to this proposal, which cuts through the current station building, but also meets local ambitions for a new station anyway, and all the placemaking qualities that we'd like to see. So really important that we want this station to connect better with the city centre as well. They're currently quite disjointed. You can't really see it very visibly and it's very tired and it's crowded and cramped. And we're expecting a doubling of passengers by 2050, so it needs to be addressed. And then this diagram on the right just explains what happens when that new track extension would come through, which effectively squeezes our forecourt, where we have our main station building and all our buses, taxis, cycle storage. Pretty much all of the interchange is on that frontage, with some limited bus stops over on Frideside Square. So it's a really important area. And we have a challenge then to look at how we can redistribute modes. And I mentioned we have existing station environment issues, so it's quite a poor sense of arrival, very poor sense of arrival into the city, a bit confusing for visitors when they come, and definitely not meeting a sort of global reputation of the city for its history, as well as for its global innovation reputation. The public realm is quite limited and not really usable, and it conceals the station entrance, and there's a lot of severance in the area, so lots of level changes to navigate. And the station's orientated away from this kind of key access that leads to the city centre that we described, and this important access that's coming with more developments on the West End going down this way. It's going to definitely change in look and feel with a lot more people. And there's no urban realm to support all this intermodal facilities either. So when we have this doubling of passengers, it is going to become more crowded and already is quite a sort of confusing environment for people who are changing modes, with very limited cycle storage as well. And so our REBA 1 option study is a really high level work that's looking to try and address this problem of how do you fit everything back in, and also look at whether we can do this in a way that is essentially self-funding. So can we unlock enough commercial development that would enable the whole scheme to be funded, which would help to escalate it. And then we also want to provide for that doubling of passengers. We want to have vastly increases cycle provision, which would take us to levels like Cambridge, which will be needed in the future. The current cycling provision is very poor and not particularly secure. And we want some integrated high quality public realm tying into Friedewide Square nicely. And so we've been looking at that really, whether that can all be re-provided, and that creates a reliance to look at our surface level car park over on Beckett Street, and reducing the size of that car park and redistributing some of the intermodal over to the car park site. And there are challenges in doing this. We would really like to significantly reduce the amount of car parking here, or potentially our local view would be even, do we need a car park in Oxford in an urban location with a park and ride down the road, about 10 minutes down the road walking. So we're really keen to reduce it, but there is a bit of a tug and pull there. Obviously, we do want people to get to a station. We don't want to sort of cause anyone to drive to their destination or think rail's not attractive, but there's lots of other parkway stations and smaller stations around Oxford as well. So this is something we really need to address, and it's very difficult to address. We're not aware of any precedents of reducing a station car park. If you know of any significant reductions, or if you're looking at one, we'd be really delighted to hear from you and to help to influence ORR's thinking on that. And we're going to be working with ORR in order to try and be that precedent, essentially, and to set an example for urban cities and how we can have sustainable movement. And they are on board with that, and Network Rail are working with them. So in terms of our next steps, as I mentioned, we're going through this options report at the moment, where we're looking at re-providing all of the modes, and we've started to do some engagement with our members, and we're going to start engaging transport and rail operators, and also engaging some of those neighbouring landowners that are funding this feasibility study. And then we need to determine, with our very limited resources remaining, do we benefit from doing wider engagement and consultation, or do we need to do sort of selective studies to kind of de-risk some of these options further based on what we hear in that kind of initial stakeholder engagement? Or is there stuff we need to do in order to better make the strategic case for this and strengthen the existing work that's already happened and is in the RNEP about the rail infrastructure, with the wider strategic case from the West End? And then there is a Network Rail led process to make the case for that reduction in the car park, which will start with they have a sort of consultation process they need to go through, which will be initially an informal one and then a formal one. And then for Network Rail to do their own sort of sensitivity testing of our viability and appraise the route to the market and whether we can actually deliver this with the market to escalate it coming forward. We do think there is a bit of a funding gap. It won't fund all of the sort of rail infrastructure, for example, but it does generate revenue in order to perhaps fund some of that rail infrastructure that would otherwise need to be met by the government. And so that is very attractive that we can bring this together in a way that can make it deliverable. But we need to keep making that case in this very tight environment with limited funding for rail, and hope that changes with the government once things stabilise. That's it from me.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kate. That's really helpful scene setting. I'm going to move us straight on to Rui, because with the tech problems at the beginning, we're now a little bit behind time. So Rui, are you ready to start screen sharing? And if you could start doing that while I introduce you. Oh, he's up and ready already. That's brilliant. Thank you. So Rui's going to talk about reopening the Cowley branch line. If you can try and keep it a bit shorter than you might have wanted to, that would be fab, so we can catch up a bit.
Yeah, my presentation is reasonably short, so no problems there. Hi everyone, I'm Rui Marcelino. I'm the Regeneration Manager at Green Transport for Oxford City Council, and I'm the project manager for the Cowley branch line. So for those who are not familiar with the Cowley branch line, the Cowley branch line is a project that proposes to upgrade an existing freight line that exists to serve the Oxford BMW mini plant. So it brings parts for the cars and transports the cars out. And normally there's about a freight train a day that utilizes this track. And the proposition is to make some improvements, so create additional capacity on the down from Oxford Central, improve the current track from 25-mile-an-hour freight to a 50-mile-an-hour freight, and create 2 new stations. So Oxford Littlemore near the Science Park and the Ellison Institute, and the Kassam Stadium for those familiar with the area, and Oxford Cowley, which is closer to the Oxford Business Park, which has now been renamed to Arc Oxford, with the mini plant. So in terms of the opportunity, so back in the autumn 2022, Network Rail had completed an outline business case for the introduction of passenger service on the Cowley branch line, and it concluded that at that point in time, and bear in mind that was autumn 2022, so those figures will be updated as the full business case develops. But at that time, anticipated final cost around £135 million, and with a BCR of 3-to-1. So a very positive return on investment in terms of rail project. And this was already utilizing the latest post-COVID methodology in terms of assessing the business case. So the City Council, in collaboration with the County Council, engaged with large landowners in the area, was able to secure £4.5 million of funds to basically fund this phase of the work that we are now. So, which comprises of the development of the full business case. So Network Rail is contracted via the City Council as the client to deliver that full business case. And another piece of work, which we call it the infrastructure place study, which is basically connecting the stations to the community, so that the stations are not two alien spaceships that just land in the area, not connected to the community. And the assumption is for running 2 trains an hour, and this is by diverting, as it were, the trains that serve Marylebone into Oxford from Chiltern, that currently stay at Oxford Central for approximately 27 minutes. And instead of staying at Oxford Central, they would continue down to Oxford Littlemore, which will be approximately 6 minutes, and Oxford Cowley, which will be 9 minutes in total, and then turn back and continue the service into London without the need for additional rolling stock, and essentially utilizing that asset more efficiently. And that also creates an opportunity for East West Rail because it frees up platform capacity at Oxford Central. So in the outline business case, Network Rail anticipated that within 3 years of operation, the service would probably see an additional 1 million journeys per year on the network, new journeys, with 2/3 coming from Oxford Littlemore and 1/3 coming from Oxford Cowley. And within the area, this map just kind of demonstrates that there is, so this is a potential large housing development as well as this. This is Northfields. This is what we call the South Oxford Science Village. And basically within 2.5 kilometers of the stations, we think probably in the next decade or so, you would find an additional 6,000 to 10,000 new homes, as well as expansion of the Oxford Business Park as a science park, and with the construction already underway of the Ellison Institute and other developments such as the bingo hall near the Kassam Stadium. We anticipate probably there will be another 265,000 square meters of employment in the area as well, which probably will generate in excess of 10,000 new jobs. So that is the Cowley Branch Line project. And just, I'm not going to go into detail on this overall program, but just to tell you that this is where we are, and this year there's a lot of activity because what we are trying to achieve is for Network Rail to complete the full business case around the autumn this year. And we have the infrastructure place study team that's looking at the immediate connectivity of the stations as well as the wider connectivity to the stations, and to produce their REBA stage 1 and 2 reports to inform that full business case, so that most of that work will be completed in the autumn, with the sort of wider connectivity work to continue beyond the autumn, probably into April 2025. And in parallel to that, there's also work that the infrastructure place study team are doing in terms of finance and funding, because for those who are not familiar with the project, we have £4.5 million for this phase of the work, but the project doesn't have confirmed funding for delivery at this stage. And a lot of the work that the team is doing in parallel with all the design and engagement work that is taking place is working on that finance and funding. So we've been we recently signed a service level agreement with the UK Investment Bank, and we've been engaging with the various government agencies, and that work will continue throughout the year to hopefully have a funding solution that is possibly agreed in principle towards the latter part of the year, but bearing in mind that there are elections this year. So this is where we are. So a lot of activity this year, a lot of engagement work, and Alistair will be talking a little bit more about the engagement work that we did, particularly around the Cowley pedestrian and cycle bridge work. But just to really summarize in terms of where the project is, as I said, 2022, the outline business case was completed. We started some of the early design work of the stations, as well as the design of the Cowley and pedestrian cycle bridge. This year is a really, really busy year in terms of activity. We have a lot of engagement work happening around the community, and we're firm believers that it is important to engage at this early stage of the project, so that it's not a surprise to when these projects come forward to the local communities that suddenly a lot of change is coming and they didn't have an opportunity to input on that change. So for us, that engagement really is in the forefront of the thinking in terms of the REBA stage 1 work. And again, this is a very optimistic target, but if we have the funding confirmed within this year, we think that Network Rail could potentially deliver this by December 2026. And there's several factors at play here. The fact that for the stations, Network Rail requires prior approval as opposed to planning, because there used to be passenger services on that track historically. The mini plant closes for 2 weeks every summer, so the freight service is not in use for 2 weeks for every August, which allows Network Rail to do quite a significant amount of work during that time. And yeah, this is the Cowley branch line. If anyone has any questions, I think we do it at the end.
Excellent, thank you very much. That was fabulously concise. We do have a question which is quite specific, so let's take it now, which is from Andy Wells. Andy, do you want to put your mic on? It's about the...
I can, thank you.
Great.
As an Oxfordshire resident, but employee of Berkshire Authority, a question for Rui. Interested as to why you didn't mention, or why there is no proposal for services from the Cowley branch line to connect to the south, for example, connecting to the stopping service from Didcot, because in recent years the connections to Didcot and beyond to the south have suffered from congestion at Oxford due to the platform constraints and limitations on timings of trains. If you're a regular user of trains from Oxford to Didcot, as I was previously, if you see there's going to be a delay to the train services out of Oxford, the first train that's going to get sat outside that platform for any length of time is going to be the stopper service to Didcot, which obviously places more carbon trips on the A34 as people switch to car and seek the park and ride sites rather than using the train services. So with the Cowley branch line serving quite a lot of employment in and around Oxford, and there being quite a lot of employees who live south of Oxford along the rail corridor, whether there's any opportunity to connect that Didcot line stopping service to the Cowley branch line rather than forcing everybody to change at Oxford, which again places more capacity constraints and congestion on Oxford Central Station.
Well, I think the answer is kind of in two parts. So I know that Network Rail and East West Rail doing quite a lot of timetabling, working, looking at various options of where their services when in the future might go beyond Oxford. So I know that work is underway. I don't know the details of it, but I know that they're exploring various scenarios, including potentially extending that into Didcot. I don't know how far that work is in terms of when that will be published, but I do know that they have already looked at potentially like 32 different iterations of timetables. So that's the kind of work that is happening. In terms of the Cowley specifically, so there isn't, the only intention, as I understand from Network Rail, is to upgrade the passing loops, the crossings at Kennington Junction, but I don't think it would permit the service to go south. So this is basically, the proposition is to just extend that service from Chiltern that currently runs Marylebone to Oxford. And because it has that 27 minutes of idle time at Oxford Central. So it's not proposing to run a dedicated service with rolling stock or anything. It's just making use of existing rolling stock and an existing service and making it more efficient. So I've not seen any proposals where Cowley would have a dedicated train operator that would not be part of an existing fleet. So that's kind of the answer in the two elements.
Thank you very much, Rory. It reminds me, it takes me back a couple of years when I was in Kensington and Chelsea, and we were trying to get a new station in North Ken and working. This is the one reason I love working in planning and in urban design, because you get to touch so many different disciplines, and working with the transport engineers and understanding that actually the starting point was the existing timetable, which was sort of not where I came from. I was thinking, well, obviously you start with the amazing opportunities around the station. Like, no. First thing we do, see where the gaps are in the existing timetable and whether we can get in another service. Oh, all right. So understanding that this can happen because you've got a train that pulls in at the station at the moment, sits there for half an hour, and it may as well chug on to another couple of stations, and therefore gives you relatively little additional cost. That makes that. Now I've had that small introduction in previous life. That makes complete sense, and it's really helpful to understand how rail planning is so dependent on rolling stock and timetables and slots and all the rest of it. So with that, let's move on to Max, who's going to take us more into the master planning side of all of this. Same to you, Max, as to Rui. If you can keep it shorter rather than longer, that would be fab. Over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm just loading my screen up. Hopefully that's visible now.
That's lovely.
And yeah, firstly, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to everyone today and share some of our projects. So I'm going to talk about our Master Planning at Stations project, and then we're briefly going to talk about two examples, Cowley Bridge being one and East Croydon the other. So firstly, so it explains how we produced the document, what it was about, and then how it can be used, who the audience is, and how it's implemented. So we worked on this project with Gerald Eve, who are providing business case and deliverability, and provided infrastructure and implementation. We worked very closely with Network Rail Technical Authority. They were our client, and throughout the project we had a big stakeholder working group taking on different parts of Network Rail, some local authorities inputting, the Design Council, other designers, and the Rail Delivery Group. And this is sort of one of a series of documents Network Rail have been working on to sort of show they've got about 28 design manuals that they're planning to have, and it's a growing number. So we've been very kind of fortunate working in about 10 of these, and they're covering a whole range of topics. So here's some examples of other ones we've worked on. We produced the Station Design Guide Manual for Network Rail, the first iteration of the Inclusive Design Manual, and also heritage, vertical circulation, wayfinding, and there's other documents that we haven't worked on, station capacity, investment, footbridges and subways. So the documents have all got slightly different audiences, but in general, they're there for project managers, sponsors, design teams, heritage groups. TOCs use them, and then they're used by local authorities to understand where network rail are coming from, what network rail's requirements are, and they're used by developers, landowners. They're all available to the public. You can find them on Network Rail's website if you search design guidance. And they're there to sort of basically explain what objectives are of a project. This project, the master planning one, explains how to prepare a scope for a master planning project, and it helps people work out who their key stakeholders are, when they should engage with them, and it sets out the different stages of a project. It goes on to explain how to develop a business case, and then it facilitates sort of what those touch points are with Network Rail for an external team. As part of the development, we've also sort of presented this to the Network Rail stakeholder group, to the DFT and to HS2, and we've sort of incorporated their feedback as well. So explain the process that we went through developing this document. We had a series of workshops, about 8 in total, that were very collaborative, where we presented content in each workshop, and then we had breaks of every half hour just to talk it through with the stakeholder groups, make sure it kind of met what they needed, placed the emphasis in the right places. And then at the end of those, we then sort of started circulating the drafts as they developed, and then the full draft for comment. And by the time we went out for comment, because we'd had this process, we'd been able to deal with most things throughout the process. And we got a document that, you know, had very good buy-in from these groups, and that sort of represented, you know, what they wanted from the process. So it's just sort of high-level contents of the document. It effectively follows the stages of project, from defining your project, preparing it, through to the methodology and planning. Then it breaks it down into elements of a station master plan, and then goes on to how you'd implement that. And then at the back, there's some toolkits that give an example of a project and different project work stages. And here's sort of an example of some of the pages. Kind of the key thing really was to make it kind of very sort of easy to access, very it provides accessibility to a range of users, and we know that not everyone using this is, you know, of a technical mindset, so we've tried to keep it very kind of clear, crisp graphics so people can sort of work their way in easily. So all the points are numbered so that people can then just sort of refer to certain points, you know, print a certain page, you know, where they're at. So what it does, it explains sort of the starting point of a project, so identifying the case for change, you know, what is the aim of your project, what are your requirements, what are you trying to achieve, who are your stakeholders. It then helps teams refine that, work out what their aspirations and governance are. It works out sort of understanding that the projects have different procurement routes, helps teams develop their brief, and it then goes through sort of the different stages of the process, and then gives sort of guidance on the next stages in terms of funding, applications, working out delivery partners and models. And it explains the sort of the different spheres of influence of the station master plan. And a station master plan's got very specific needs around the technical requirements of a station that's, you know, different from a typical project. So it explains some of those sort of requirements around the station, sort of the slightly wider sphere of interchange, and then sort of beyond that, developments around the station, through to urban quarter and sort of much wider areas of influence. So it explains sort of how stations can integrate with their context and how you can bring together multiple interests as part of your project. It gives some examples of what potential stakeholders could be, you know, whether that's from the client project team through to public stakeholders, private stakeholders and community stakeholders, and explains that obviously every project is different depending on the scale of the project. There might be more stakeholders, there might be less. You might have more engagement for a bigger project, but it helps people kind of poses those questions about what are your stakeholders for your project, and it sort of gives examples as a good starting point for projects to develop their matrix. It then goes through and give some examples about what different spatial issues might be, you know, and just so users can then sort of start working out what some of their challenges might be for their project, and then how they can develop those into requirements and aspirations. And so explaining, you know, that all projects are different, how projects can challenge the boundary. So for some projects, they might have a very focused input on the station, and it's more of a station-focused project with certain interface of outside elements. Others may take on specific areas that are, you know, not necessarily linearly around the station, but taking up opportunities for development around the rail corridor or around sites of interest. And some will have a broader study area where they're looking much more holistically. But we also sort of say as part of the document, challenge the boundary. There might be bits that are not necessarily so closely related to the station, but they're on the periphery and they're worth bringing into the project, or there might be future opportunities. So what it goes on to explain is how the vision can be built and the methodology for doing that. So it talks about how visions can be aligned. So key stakeholders will all have different visions, and it's how they can be brought in and aligned to a combined vision. And it talks about the success factors and the benefits for the vision so that can be measured and implemented. And it goes through element by element to explain sort of some of the technical needs for the station, some of the interchange needs, and then sort of what's required in the public realm. When we were writing this, one of the kind of key things we're trying to achieve was that, particularly for local authorities that won't have dealt with station projects, they might not understand all of the technical requirements, and it might be that the technical team will go to the local authority and use this as a way of explaining some of the station challenges. You know, their challenges around current operations, challenges about allowing for the future of the railway to develop and meeting future station needs, you know, making sure that the station could be maintained and accessed safely, and making sure that in doing a master plan, it doesn't end up sort of reducing the functionality of the station. It also explains about other kind of historic assets, you know, things like signal boxes, sidings that might not always be used, that could be brought into a challenged master plan boundary. And then we've explained as part of the optioneering process how options can be developed, defined, refined, and then assessed. And we give some examples of different levels of assessment, from sort of RAG scoring through to more qualitative assessment. And we give some ideas of what kind of key considerations they might be. So around the quality of the space, the orientation and wayfinding, you know, and how deliverable different options are. It then goes into sort of a whole series of information on viability, which Gerald Eve helped put together for us, and explains some of the needs in terms of considering what the outputs are. You know, what are you trying to achieve? Where's the funding coming from? What do you need to get to in terms of making a profit or covering the cost of the project? Have you allowed the right contingencies? Have you allowed for costs? Getting people to think about this really early on in the process so that they can start looking at this and making sure the project's going to meet their requirements. And it talks about different delivery models. You know, will it be delivered mostly by a rail team? Will it be delivered with private funding? Will that be shared? Will it be a joint venture? And it doesn't give kind of tons of detail, but the purpose is that it gives enough detail to start posing the questions that teams can then assess what's right for them and go and find out sort of what they need to learn. One of the things throughout the document is we want to provide enough information that people aren't missing things out, or they're not missing things they're not sure about. So it'll give them enough information to get started. It'll pass them on to other documents and other places to find out more detail. And it helps people assess a business case. So it explains sort of some of the core elements of a business case and work out different types of business case around program development. So working out what you need at early stage of project through to outline business case and then full business case development. Then later on in the document, we give an example project, which is sort of based around a hypothetical place, but with sort of lots of common issues, connectivity issues, improving public realm around the station, meeting cycle requirements, meeting connectivity on both sides of a rail station and connectivity around a new urban development, and how station drop-off and pick-up and other interchange can be improved. We can if there's any kind of questions now on the document, we can go through those, or I can go through to a couple of examples, and then we can have questions at the end. I'll keep going. And
yeah, sorry, I was actually just talking to Maura about the fact that she can't get into the chat, so I was just WhatsApping with Maura. I'm very sorry that you caught me napping. You've been going 11 minutes, so yeah, give the example.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about East Croydon ASD master plan first, and then Alistair will talk about Cowley Bridge. So this was a project we worked on around an upgrade to East Croydon Station. So we worked on this with Arup, Stantec, Core 5, Space Agency, and Montague Evans. This was for Network Rail property, and alongside this, the main sort of Network Rail Southern team were looking at station redevelopment at East Croydon. We set out kind of very quickly what our aims were, and it was about stitching the new station works into the community, developing something that was at human scale but added density and visual delight, that had rich public realm variety, and that was sort of vibrant and alive at all times of the day. So our development was around the East Croydon rail corridor. The project East Croydon is to go from 6 rail tracks to 8. So as part of that, Network Rail have ownership or co-ownership of a lot of the lands sort of to the north of the station. They'll be redeveloped for the rail corridor. They'll be used during that construction work, and then afterwards they'll be given over for third-party retail and other development. So we provided a range of programs on this, from office development through to residential, and then hybrid, retail and residential. And as part of this, we were working with the rail team, really understanding what their requirements were so that we could define those and define all stations what the interface was with railway and station. So one of the key things is sort of we were looking at adjacent site development, so where there wasn't a rail interface in the end case, and we also looked at some oversight development. Where there isn't any rail interface, it's always the best scenario because you're not aligning structure with station, you've not got operational requirements to consider, and you've got the best world of being close to the station, which is, you know, adding great value, great connectivity for people that live and work there, but you don't have all of those sort of rail interfaces. So we're working really hard to try and sort of put a kind of clear line where we could between rail and station, or sorry, rail and development. So development was separated from any rail interface wherever possible. And as part of this, we developed, I'm sort of going to focus on 2 sites we looked at. One of them had a heavy interface with the station operations yard. So the station operations yard was here. This was coming in early, and this was going to have all the sort of goods access to the station. It then had car parking for the station, retail above that, and then a big sort of residential development above that. And it was replacing a fairly tall building that was owned by Royal Mail. Throughout the project development, so what we're working hard with the Network Rail team and our viability consultants to explain was that this is going to be used as a goods yard for Network Rail for a couple of years, but you can't have a goods yard and then suddenly put a development on top of it unless it's all been planned holistically. So it's working out where all those columns are going, where all the piles are going, where all the support's happening for the residential development. And a lot of the things we talked about is, you know, there's always a kind of trade-off between flexibility and efficiency. And you could have a completely flexible scheme that you could put anything you want on top of, but you'd be having a lot of transfer and a lot of inefficiency. It's not going to stack up from a commercial point of view. So we're trying to get to that point, and we got to that point where we could provide enough certainty around the scheme to give them quite a fixed layout, but allow a little bit of flexibility, because this will come on, you know, 15, 20 years time. The market's going to want slightly different things in terms of unit mix. It might go from more residential to more commercial. And it was that key thing of working out how much flexibility do you want and how much do you allow for. A second site to focus on is the entrance to East Croydon Station, where there's a new entrance at the north and then a commercial development over that. From a station point of view, you want as much of that site to be dominated by the station, a clear open entrance, you know, good visibility, good access. From a commercial point of view, you want as much commercial front door and access as possible, and there was also sort of needs for retail on the ground floor and so on. So there's that tension between getting the best thing from a commercial development and getting the best from the station. And what we couldn't end up with was a commercial development with no real ground presence, because that's really going to impact the kind of values and the impact of the viability of the scheme. And from a station point of view, it needed to tick all the boxes as a clear new open entrance. And there's these sort of tensions that we had with the station team, and we got to an outcome that worked well for both. It gave a kind of clear open entrance that provided spatial requirements that we needed to hit, and a sort of clear segregated entrance for the commercial.
We've been going for 15 minutes now.
Yeah, and we'll move on to Cowley Bridge. So I'll hand over to Alistair.
Great, thanks, Max. I'll be very brief here. I'm Alistair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Max's colleague. I've been working with Kate on the Oxford Station master plan, and also with Rui on the Cowley pedestrian and cycle bridge, which I'll touch on quickly here. Not really going to go too much into design, but really focusing on how stakeholder engagement has been really key to understanding the constraints and opportunities of this project. So what we're looking to do here, as I say, is provide a pedestrian and cycle bridge. And in terms of location here, if you imagine Rui's map earlier, we're very close to Oxford Cowley Station, which is the one that is 9 minutes away from central Oxford. So quite close to the BMW mini plant. And this isn't a bridge that's connecting directly into the new platform, but it's adjacent to it. And so what we try to do on this project, we started sort of late last year on this project, but from the very first few weeks we were sort of trying to get lots of community engagement, and I mean more sort of stakeholder engagement in terms of councillors, local groups, in terms of cycle groups and things like that, just to really understand the constraints and opportunities for this bridge. So in terms of this this actual project, the recommendation for a crossing at this point came from a study that was carried out last year, and then we were commissioned to carry out how this should be delivered. If you could just go on to the next slide, please. So here's just some of the early considerations of the project. We knew early on that this was going to be a ramped access bridge, so quite long on both sides of the track to get up to a point where you have the requisite height above the line. And for that reason, that, as I said, this sort of stakeholder engagement with some of the groups that I've listed down the side is really important to understand a correct alignment for this bridge, how it could be well used by people, able-bodied people, but also cyclists and wheelchair users. And so here we just sort of listed out some of the considerations that we consulted on really early. And this was really key for us to understand some of the more technical constraints, as I was saying, about the required height. We needed to be above the line to be outside of the kinematic envelope of the train and things like that. But also more the kind of aspirational qualities of the bridge. How can we make this a pleasant environment to be in? This effectively is connecting Blackbird Leys to the south to areas to the north, which we have the sort of big Tesco there, and passing underneath the underpass. This then connects into Arc Oxford with this kind of big sort of business park, which is increasing in size at the moment as well. So it's about how we can make these sort of logical connections. And if you just screen seems to have gone blank for me, but if you could just,
it's gone blank for me too.
It's okay. Are you still?
Well, I wonder if we bring it to a close.
That's
there.
fine. That's fine. Effectively, to say that this was sort of stakeholder engagement probably earlier than we would normally do on a project, but it's been really valuable in this to understand some of the constraints. And as I say, in terms of output, we've taken the feedback we've been given, and it's really fed into understanding about how this can connect across the track. And then once we have ideas on alignment or design, we then feed that back to these stakeholders, and they feed into it to really understand as an iterative process that we're making the right decisions and how this new bridge relates to its context. I think that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a really helpful presentation. Having the setting out what the master planning document does, and then having those examples, I found really helpful. And going back again to the job of us as planners and urban designers, so much of our work, you have to suddenly become an expert in something. So most of us don't spend all our time master planning stations, and then suddenly it's the job that you have to sort out. So having this guidance will be so helpful, rather than just having to start from square one and learn on the job and make some fairly rookie errors on the way. So saving that would be nice. Right, we're going to move straight on to Murray in the interests of time. But Murray, while you're beginning to screen share, I just want to check with people on the call as to whether you can use the chat, because we have got some problems with the chat. There are people making comments on the chat, but it's possible that some of you are being frustrated and not being able to do that. So if you are not able to speak in the chat, can you just put your mic on and say, and then I'll know that when we come to questions, we need to actually go to the floor rather than rely on what's in the chat. I'm just going to pause to give someone a moment to put their mic on and say, no, I can't get into the chat. I'm not hearing anyone saying that, so I'm assuming the chat's working all right, which is great. Sorry, Maura. Sounds as though you're
just be me.
The only person that's excluded.
I'm locked out,
isn't it? The most important person on the call can't see the chat, but never mind. We are texting one another, so it's working. So, Murray, if you'd like to introduce yourself and take it away, thank you.
Sure, thanks very much. Well, hello all. I'm Murray Woodburn. I'm Head of Traffic and Transportation at Milton Keynes Council. And I'm going to give you a little whistle-stop tour on how East West Rail is helping deliver on our objectives for growth and regeneration in Bletchley and along the Marston Vale line, or Marston Vale as we call it. Why is this not moving? There we go. This is the wrong presentation. Excuse me, one moment.
And we did all that prep beforehand just to try and make that,
marvellous, isn't it? Here we go.
Oh, you just can't get the speakers these days.
Right, yes, there we go. Right, so with the correct and revised slides this time.
Nicely, smoothly done.
Here we go. As I said, we're going to look at Bletchley in particular today. So our key themes in terms of where East West Rail was going to help us were clearly we have some clear regeneration objectives in Bletchley. It's already the subject of some town deal funding from DLUC. And those of you who have been to Bletchley will know that it probably needs a little bit of TLC and a little bit of investment, particularly in the town centre. So that's the regeneration angle. Alongside that, we have potentially the prospect of a new station entrance, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But how that can improve the existing connectivity with the town centre is quite key to our thinking. Then there are also the growth opportunities along the Marston Vale line itself as you head eastwards towards Bedford. And clearly we are in the stage of moving forward on our local plan at the moment. We are moving towards Reg 18 in the summer. And clearly we need to identify growth locations. And East West Rail gives us the opportunity to deliver some sustainable growth in southeastern Milton Keynes. So I'll cover that in a little bit as well. So first of all, Bletchley then. So as I mentioned, Bletchley is obviously a key interchange about halfway along the East West Rail route, and is the key interchange with the West Coast Main Line. It's already an existing very important station on the West Coast Main Line with quite high commuter numbers, and it has a pretty good train service actually, both on the West Coast Main Line and now back on the Marston Vale line, which has just recently restarted. Now there's a number of moving parts in Bletchley which make things a little bit difficult to coordinate, but I will try and run through them, and you can see the sort of balls that we've got up in the air at the moment that we are trying to juggle and to get a bit of clarity, because generally they all relate to each other quite closely. So as well as all our regeneration of Bletchley Town Centre, we are also proposing a new transport hub and improved public realm at Saxon Street, which is just to the east of the station, just to the east of that area numbered 12 there, the pink area. And that is effectively a relocation of our existing bus station in Bletchley and an improvement to a slightly more modern facility with better embedded public realm and better connectivity to other transport modes. And of course, ideally, we would love it to connect seamlessly to a new Eastern Station entrance. But the difficulty is that we're not sure where that entrance is going to be, and therefore integrating unknown entrance effectively in public realm terms is quite challenging. So it's important that we try and nail down some of these key moving parts so that we can inform the rest of the designs as they come forward. So the master plan is dependent upon the location of certain key access points, as you can imagine. We then also have, to the east of the station, the actual town centre itself, the high street, if you like, of Bletchley, which is known as Queensway. And that's a very tired environment, and it supports, you know, the usual mixture of nail bars and chicken shops that you tend to get in relatively run-down shopping environments. So clearly the public realm enhancement, as well as the improved connectivity to an enhanced station, rail service, some key sites that the...
Max, you're breaking up for us. Well, you're breaking up for me. I don't know whether that's the case with anyone else. I don't know if it might be.
Yes, me too. Sorry, Maria, I can't hear you either.
Can I suggest to turn your camera off, because that might be enough to give you bandwidth for us to hear you.
It was yeah, it was good for most of it. It was just at the end there, Murray. So I'm hoping.
Yes, I'm not sure.
Just give it a go now and see how we go.
Yes, okay. Well, I've switched my camera off, so hopefully you might be able to hear me a little better now. I have very good internet at home, so I'm not sure what's going on. Anyway, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yep, that's good.
So we also have a whole number of sites. We have Milton Keynes Development Partnership, MKDP, who are an arm of the council, the development arm of the council, and they are landowners of a certain number of key sites in this area. So we have control over quite a number of the developments that are coming forward, which obviously helps. Now, as far as the Saxon Street Transport Hub is concerned, as I said, we've got some funding, 9 million in fact, for a new bus interchange, which we will hope will integrate with this new station entrance. It includes new redways, which are of course our walking and cycling network, and public realm enhancement to improve that connectivity from the station to the town centre. And I'll show you just how bad that is in a minute. We are obviously keen to deliver future mobility hubs, and I'll come on to that in a moment when we come to the Marston Vale section of the presentation, where that's very much integral to our proposals for each of the stations there. And as I say, we've got to try and work around at the moment a future-proofing Eastern Station entrance, which we're not exactly sure where it could be, because effectively that station entrance can move up and down the platform length according to engineering and other considerations. So it would be nice to have that nailed down to inform how the rest of the designs respond to that. Clearly, we also have our mass rapid transit network, which we are working on, which we're now outlining business case for. But that is showing some pretty substantial benefits and a good business benefit cost ratio. So it may well be that we will have an MRT system operating through here at some point in the future. So we have to design for that as well. And then, of course, there's the connectivity to the town centre. And if I move on to the station now, I'll just show you how horrible it is at the moment. So here's Bletchley Station, which you can see there on the left-hand side of the railway tracks. And the town centre is on the right-hand side of the railway tracks. The existing route for those who are not mobility impaired is the orange one. So you walk out of the station, you turn left, you walk through what appears to be London North Western Railways staff car park and bin store, and then you walk down some steps, you go underneath the rather dark and dingy 5-track railway bridge at that point, I think, And then you go across 2 carriageways, across a zebra crossing and then another crossing, and then down about 1.5 meters, either via a zigzag ramp or a set of steps, into the town centre. And that is the non-accessible route. The accessible route is the red one, believe it or not. So if you're going to the town centre, you have a very convoluted journey from Bletchley railway station because of that entrance that faces effectively the wrong side. Now the green arrow shows what we could do in terms of connectivity to the town centre from a new eastern entrance. So we realised that the eastern entrance is needed for not purposes, but in terms of connectivity to the station and connecting to the station's area's catchment, because all the people live over to the east. Bletchley Park is over to the west. So if you're a tourist and you're going to Bletchley, it's not. So unfortunately, we would obviously like a station on the an entrance on the other side of the station. And what that does is unlock that significant housing growth in those regeneration sites that we control in Bletchley town centre. Now, moving from Bletchley then, sorry, we've got one more slide on Bletchley, yes, and that's the public realm scheme, which is to essentially enhance that connectivity from the station and create that seamless public realm improvement to support the regeneration of the town centre. It's obviously closely linked to the transport hub because it needs to connect to that, and the eastern entrance, which needs to connect to the hub. So we need to integrate all of these projects a bit better. But what that will do is we'll create a proper entrance point into Bletchley Station, which at the moment is completely remote. Now, moving quickly on to Marston Vale, just to finish off a couple of slides on this. You can see there our local plan growth areas, and you can see in the sort of bottom right of the picture, the Marston Vale line running across through Bletchley, where the red blob is. And you can see some significant growth areas to the south and north of the Marston Vale line across to the east there. So potentially what the East-West Rail project will allow us to do is to deliver far more sustainable growth in those areas, utilising the new stations along the route and the improved service along the route. And I shouldn't have mentioned there was a new station, actually, a relocated station, but that we'll find out all about that in the consultation. But what it does, of course, is it offers us a more sustainable growth solution if we do it correctly, which is the key part. So station design and the facilities will be critical if we want to deliver that sustainability. So what I've shown there is the classic Como mobility hub diagram. That is the sorts of facilities that we would expect to see at each of the stations along the Marston Vale line on East-West Rail. So your classic mobility hub features there: cargo bikes, electric bike hire, e-scooters, parcel lockers, electric vehicle charging, a high quality bus interchange of some sort, plus good connections to the walking and cycling network. Nice places to stay, to sit rather, and wait, and also a small retail unit, which is ideal, particularly for people using EV charging. The other part of this equation is speaking to the developers to make sure that they get on board with this and make sure that their layouts respond to this approach, and that they optimize the sustainable connectivity to the stations and also the development layout internally of those developments to encourage this behavioral change approach to new growth. Which leads us neatly and seamlessly on to Robbie's presentation, which is after mine, because this is what the East-West Rail door-to-door strategy is all about. And I just want to finish with a slide on collaborative working, because this is just so essential, because we've got so many moving parts here. So we have East-West Rail, Network Rail, and our other key stakeholders, the Town Deal, DLUC, and Homes England, all on our board. We also have the Town Deal board, who like to make their decisions as well. We have at the moment what's called the LOP programme, the Local Opportunities Planning programme, which is East West Rail funded to try and bring some of this clarity together and to make sure we can crystallise these benefits for the East West Rail project. And that's partly as a result of some of the audit officer's observations on the project. But clearly we are aiming to maximise the economic and sustainable benefits of East West Rail. And the good thing is we're all working to the same outcomes. So I will stop there. And there's a picture of one of our rare Marston Vale Line trains there, which we were missing for so long, but they're back again.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Perfect timing. So thank you. I think what we'll do is go straight into Robbie, not least because you've teed him up so perfectly. I have to leave the call, I'm afraid, at 2 o'clock. So I will probably, in fact, I'll say goodbye now. I will listen to Robbie because I want to hear what he has to say. But I will hand over to Kate and Maura to chair the final questions. So please keep the questions coming in the chat. And Robbie, do you want to start seeing if your slides will still work for us?
I hope they will. Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, that's perfect.
Brilliant. Okay. Hi, I'm Robbie Gibb. So I am the door-to-door connectivity project lead at East West Rail. My background's in rail for a very, very long time. And I've done everything from station management, development to franchise bidding. So I've kind of had some input around door-to-door connectivity through bidding and stuff like that. But at East West Rail, this is a great opportunity for us to really push a integrated connectivity agenda. And that's part of what the door-to-door project is about and how we approach connectivity at EWR. So without further ado, I shall move us to our next slide. So this is the big opportunity. When you look at the route that East West Rail takes from Oxford across Cambridge and back, there is so much opportunity across the route for connectivity and for improving prosperity through economic growth. So you can see there that the route crosses all the main kind of north-south arterial lines, some of the cross-country lines too. There are ongoing developments, in the Cambridge area, the A428, which will help to connect East West Rail stations better in the future. Equally, as Murray mentioned, there are some great developments in the Marston Vale MK area around mass rapid transit. And as we look across all of these places, they all have the potential to be really good bus rail interchanges as well. And I think that's something that today is kind of lost. And it's been more difficult since COVID. So we all know the problems that bus operators have had, but now we're seeing a resurgence, and hopefully we can tap into that resurgence as we continue to develop our connectivity strategy. So for us, door to door is really important because the railway itself delivers so many benefits across the region, and we're aiming to bring that additional economic development into the region. But actually door to door is a key element of that, because we look at it and say you can put a railway station there, but if you can't get people to the railway station, then actually there is limitations on what you can actually deliver. So with our strategy, it's always looking to see how we can improve that connectivity, whether it be local, regional, national, where we can align with what local authorities are doing, and ultimately the enhancement of benefits. So improving the connections, making it easier for people to get to work, education, open up new opportunities. A big element of our strategic thinking is around offering choice. So whilst we don't preclude the car, we are about making sure that people have a good, consistent and logical choice of doing something sustainable to get to and from the station, whether it be bus, shared mobility, or active travel. We want to promote active travel and enable that in any way we can, whether that be through the facilities that we have at stations or whether it be through joint working with local authorities to help get things like cycle paths, etc., off the ground. The environmental benefits go without saying, and of course, leading on from what Murray was just saying, the connectivity piece around East West Rail can really help to enhance that economic development and the sustainable development across the whole route. So door-to-door connectivity, it sounds pretty self-explanatory, really. Ron Seald says it does what it says on the tin. For us, we look at it from through three lenses. So it's connectivity to and from stations, promoting and enabling active travel, and maintaining community connectivity. So just a little bit on maintaining community connectivity, because that might be something that's a little bit different for some. For us as a major rail project, we're going to go through communities that have not got a line going through them at the moment, or the upgrade of the line will lead to things like level crossings, public rights of way being closed or changed, and therefore a part of what we're looking at in terms of connectivity is how we maintain that community connectivity. So if we are going to sever a community or sever some public rights of way, how can we make sure that we're going to do that we're going to provide a replacement means of getting from one part of the community to the other that enables people to do it easily. A little bit about our approach here and how we are approaching door-to-door in terms of the project. So we've got three phases. Phase one, which is completed, and many of you will have seen the output of that, which is the door-to-door connectivity strategy. That was approved by DfT February time. We've also engaged a lot with England's economic heartlands on the development of that strategy, and of course the transport officer group. So we're at a stage where EEH has endorsed our approach, and we're continuing to work together as we move forward. The strategy itself leans on the three pillars I mentioned there, but also looks at what is the scope of EWR within the red line boundary, the station land, the trackside land, etc., and then how do we integrate that with the role of others, with local authorities, with other third parties, to deliver something that is really cohesive and joined up. So the strategy itself has 7 key principles. So as we were developing this, we wanted to make sure that there was, I call them golden threads that run through everything, and this is them really. So first and foremost, we believe in collaboration. It's really important for us to be able to move forward and work with others. We can't deliver all of the sort of aspirations that we have on our own. I think we all recognise that in our individual organisations, and we need to make sure that we're working together to work out who's best to fund, deliver, design a solution in the local areas around the stations that we'll have. We want customers to have choice, as I mentioned earlier, with the focus on sustainable modes. We've done a lot of work and will continue to do a lot of work around identifying best practice, whether it be internationally or within the UK, as well as considering all the current standards and the movements that happen from time to time in those current standards to make sure we're delivering consistently. We'll mitigate the impact of severance, as I mentioned, so people can still get to the places that matter to them most. Money comes into it at number 5. So, we need to balance the cost and benefit to deliver value for money. So we want, to look, and that's where it stitches in with innovation and with future proofing to make sure that we're delivering something that it could be delivered in phase, maintains optionality, but also deliver something that can be value for money at the start and continue to be value for money in the future as well. Mentioned their future proofing. When the first trains were operating all the way through on East West Rail, the environments around the stations, the communities we serve, the sizes of those communities will be very different than they will be in 20 or 30 years from now. So we need to consider that. And I think that's a huge element of a lot of the projects that are going on across the ARC at the moment, is considering what happens in the future and how do we build for that. And our connectivity offer will be consistent and accessible for all. I think many people kind of go, well, accessible for all it should be a standard in the railway. The way we look at it is making sure that we've hammered home the message that it's accessible for all, but not just at the railway bit, outside. So if it's buses, if it's shared mobility, cycle paths, active travel, those need to be accessible too, so you can have that seamless movement through the system. So we're now moving on to phase 2. We just started in the last few weeks, and there are 2 key objectives for us in phase 2 in terms of deliverables, but they're underpinned by the fact that we want to continue and we want to build stronger and stronger collaborative relationships across the ARC and with key stakeholders, including, England's economic heartlands, local authorities. DfT heavily involved, of course, as our client, but ATE, Network Rail, the transport operators, and shared mobility services like Como UK. So the 2 objectives for door-to-door, number 1 is what we have in our power within the DCO. So what are we going to build into the design? We want to ensure that all of the requirements that we pick up through collaborative working across the region and through our own identification of the wants and needs of customers are included within the design of the stations, crossings and trackside. So that's a key element, because that feeds into the kind of interim design which is being worked on at the moment, and we'll be able to therefore deliver further information as we go down the statutory consultation process on how we can deliver quality and connectivity in those areas. The second part is, for me, it's really exciting, and I think I'm not a transport planner, but I think from a transport planning perspective, it's really exciting to work out actually how do we do that connectivity piece outside of the boundary of the railway land, making sure that we're looking at to try to co-create a suite of initiatives that range potentially from cycle paths to fast bus services. But for me, it's really important that we accept that actually, without collaborating on this particular piece of work, as I said earlier, it doesn't really matter what you put at the station if you don't actually put something that can help you to get to the station in the way you want to get to the station. Nearly come to the end. So what does a future customer journey look like? So I had a little sit down a while back and thought, well, I've got a lot of experience in ticketing and using technology in rail, but also you've got the fundamentals, the tangibles that are there, like buses, like the second appearance of the Como UK hub there today. But these are really important elements that if you stitch them together in the right way, you can create a really seamless door-to-door journey. We've taken an example here of someone who lives in Kidlington and their workplace is all the way over in Eton Socon, just outside of St Neots. So quite a long old trek. But for us, it's important that we put in place the pieces, the building blocks that allow that journey to happen sustainably, that allow it to happen through the modal choice that a customer wants, and that they can do it seamlessly. So being able to plan everything on an app before you start your journey, or on the converse side, not having to plan anything because your app just does it for you, or you have it, or that the bus is going to turn up at a high frequency, that it'll be comfortable, that you'll be able to get to the station, and when you get to the station you can walk straight into the station because the bus stops there. When you're on the train, you're able to stay connected. This is there's an element of connectivity round. Actually, I can plan the next stage of my journey while I'm on the train. As we continue looking at things like rolling stock in the future, we like many rail operators, considering how much bikes spaces on trains is going to be important to understand how we can actually take some of our active travel modes with us. And then when you get to the other end, if you want to get on a scooter and you know, an e-scooter, and ride the last mile of your journey up the, you know, up a segmented cycle path or something like that, you should be able to do it. You should be able to do it easily. And so tying those things together, delivering a seamless experience, creates a great customer journey in the future. And equally, it's a you know, for us, it is almost like a menu of parts we can offer customers and people who perhaps don't travel by rail today, that menu of parts. Then it makes rail more attractive. It makes public transport connectivity more attractive in the future. And that is it. So thank you.
Another perfectly timed presentation. And with that, I will thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. I found it extremely interesting, but I'll now hand over to Kate and wish you all goodbye.
You. Thank you so much, all the speakers. I found today super valuable. Really good reminder of the excellent sort of Network Rail guidance that's been produced with Weston and others, and all the guidance coming through East West Rail with Economic Heartland that you've just ended on as well there. And yeah, thank you to all the speakers for sharing your case studies, which bring it all to life. I think, Maura, haven't got much time for questions. So we wrap up at 2. But I'm very happy to.
Yeah, Kate, we're going on to 2:30, so we've got plenty of time for questions.
Oh, good. I'm sorry. I got the time muddled up.
So people stay on as long as they want to.
Thank you. Good. I don't know why I've got the timings wrong in my brain. That's really great news, because there is a lot, I think, here that we can draw on. We've got, I think, quite a mixed audience. I know we didn't necessarily manage to get the poll working, but from what I could see, there was quite a big divide between, you know, people working on master plans and lots of people who are not, who are just here for interest's sake. So I think what you just raised at the end there is really valuable. Really relating this to the customer. We're all trying to make the rail successful so that we, users of the railway, can get on it and have those seamless journeys. So I think that really brings it back to why this is all really important, as well as all of that, you know, zooming out and you know, how do we get people over railway lines, which is coming up in the chat, which is a common problem everywhere that we're all identifying with, and wanting to make bridges accessible, and not make, you know, there is a real challenge with bridges to make them accessible, you know, technically accessible, I suppose, and then the actual reality when you are trying to get up them in a wheelchair or supporting someone to do so, that the ramp is, you know, impossible. You know, it's just not realistic that you could ever push yourself up there. So it is a real challenge to do that, which I'm sure Rui would identify with. So yeah, are there any questions in the chat we haven't picked up? I think we just had one. I'll work backwards, sorry, but Catherine, I don't know if you want to turn your mic on and ask yourself, or I can ask for you.
Yeah, hello. It was just a question about land ownership. I'm working on the new station that's going to come forward at Culham, just to the south of Oxford, and potentially we've got a bit of a land ownership sort of question around that, and I just wondered if there's any experience with, you know, land ownership issues.
What kind of issues are you sort of referring to when you're talking about land ownership?
So there'll be land, there's a slither of land that's not Network Rail and not part of the strategic site.
Oh, I see. So I don't have an issue in terms of, like, you know, having a patch of land where we're not able to engage with the landowner in the Oxford Station master plan. Do any of the other sort of panelists have any experience?
Well, I can add to that, Kate. So in the case of the Cowley, there's what we call a ransom strip of land between Tesco and Network Rail land. But what Network Rail colleagues are doing is I believe they're engaging with that landowner early on in the process, so to try and secure an agreement with that landowner. So if the project gets funded, then they would have that agreement in place.
Yeah, that early engagement seems really key if you can sort of get them on board, and then I suppose if there is a really strong case towards CPO, then that's your last resort. Does anyone else have any other experience they want to chip in?
Yeah, I was just from the Milton Keynes perspective, we were quite lucky in that we were quite significant landholders, public landholders, so we own quite a lot of the sites. So if we were to draw a master plan around Bletchley Station, we could include quite a lot of potential development sites, as you know, Max's sort of challenge your boundary sort of master plan area. So we were quite lucky in that regard, but we are not squeamish about compulsory purchase either if we think we can assemble a far better and more viable site which would support a better level of development. The other thing is, of course, that if you are a significant landholder, you can sort of gang up on the smaller landholders, which kind of makes them get on board really without necessarily having to compulsory purchase. So, you know, early engagement and having those discussions about how potentially they could improve the value of their sites. You know, it's, you know, ultimately that's what developers are all about really. So if you start talking numbers to them, they generally listen.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to avoid the CPO if you can at all, but sometimes just talking about it can help to accelerate things a little bit along and, you know, make things get taken a little bit more seriously, I suppose, because it's no one wants to go through that process.
Yeah, I mean, the other way that we try and get what we want, obviously, is when we do bring these sites forward, such as the Brunel Centre, which is a key site just to the east of Bletchley Station, which is basically between the station and the town centre high street itself. The way that we influence the way in which that site is brought forward is through our SPDs. So we'll issue an SPD which says exactly what we want that ties in with the rest of that sort of overall master plan. And then, you know, the developers got that written down right from the start, so that, you know, you don't have to try and corral them back into, you know, what you want them to do, because that's kind of set out quite clearly from the outset before they're even interested in the site.
Catherine, does that chime at all with the kind of experience you're having, or is there any, or do you have a follow-up kind of response or question?
No, I think we're at really early stages yet, so it's just sort of flagged as something for us to address. So I think you're right, the early engagement will be helpful, and we're lucky that I don't think it's going to be a ransom strip. It's just it would be the ideal location.
Yeah.
So yeah, getting on to early.
Good reminder about early engagement. And when we, with the Oxford Station Master Plan, we're not at that stage yet, but there are like a couple of areas where we may need to get access over, you know, another party's land, for example, and that early engagement will be really important to, you know, check that that's kind of within what they're expecting, or, you know, just to understand where they stand on the issue before you press too far. And then that can be, you know, allowed for as the project moves forward and thinking about its feasibility and viability. Which is really great. Sorry, I'm just because I'm talking, and Maura, are you able to see the chat or not at the moment?
Yeah, I can see it. So great. If we want to go back, the mass rapid transit was something that was brought up.
That was me.
Clarification was requested by a couple of people.
I think you skimmed past that, saying, you know, and I just think it's such an interesting thing to talk about that it's worth just sort of saying what that is on a tin, because lots of different experiences on the call.
Yeah, okay. Well, I can quickly give you like a 30-seconder on that. We are at the moment in Milton Keynes looking at trying to provide a viable public transport network alongside some densification of development, because that's half of our problem in Milton Keynes. We don't have sufficient density to sustain a decent public transport service. But we are looking at a BRT, a bus rapid transit, a tram-like vehicle that runs on rubber wheels, on a largely segregated but not entirely segregated network with higher frequencies. There are 4 key routes at the moment which we're looking at. And we are looking to sort of adjust the rest of the bus network to basically feed into that. So not only will MRT come along and hopefully be a viable network, but it will also hopefully support the other bus services by them scooping people up and delivering them to key interchanges on our MRT route. So that's the logic, and that also will help support some of our growth options in the local plan. And we are number crunching that to death at the moment with an army of consultants trying to find out if we can make this stack up financially. But we've already discovered that if we built a fancy new tram-like system in Milton Keynes tomorrow, the amount of people who used it would be exactly the same number that use the bus in the moment. So we realize that there are going to need to be complementary measures introduced, which is the euphemistic way of describing a number of rather unpleasant, perhaps, interventions, such as increasing parking charges, reducing the availability of parking, reducing grid road speeds, reducing highway capacity in the centre of Milton Keynes, a whole bunch of other things, which are less palatable than a shiny new public transport network. But people need to realise, and politicians need to realise, that you can't have one without the other.
Interesting. And excuse my ignorance on all of this, but what's the advantage then of this? Is it the mass word in it over like an electric bus, say?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's to do with the volumes and the frequencies, but also it's a hybrid between a bus and a tram, so there is a visual and perception difference as well in terms of that sort of ridership level. So it's a fancy new form of public transport to try and reinvent the bus, although it is effectively a rubber-wheeled vehicle that drives around like a bus would.
So they go any faster than buses?
Well, it's got a pointy front and all that kind of stuff. You know, it looks more like a tram than a bus, but ultimately it's just a bus.
Okay, cool. That's really good. And yeah, I know there's a few areas sort of trialing and trying to look at these kind of rapid transit systems at the moment. So really great for you to put a bit more flesh on the bone around that.
Yeah, we also have, I mean, this would be the subject of another chat one day perhaps, but we also have an autonomous, very rapid transit project where sort of little autonomous pods running on their own dedicated tracks. And we're working with Cranfield, and that's a much longer distance, so that would be a sub-regional thing. So you know, that potentially would be an Oxford to Milton Keynes autonomous vehicle shuttle with, you know, 12 people in it traveling at 65 or 70 miles an hour on a segregated track.
Amazing. Well, if I think that should work anywhere, then I'm visualizing it in Milton Keynes, you know, this futuristic Jetsons land where they're going to go from Milton Keynes to our innovation, you know, capital in Oxford as well. And
exactly, yeah. Well, I'm sure someone
shuttle people between the jobs and the wider network. Yeah, it'd be
I'm sure if you look back through the drawings of the 1970s, you will probably find an illustration of that very system somewhere in the minds of the town planners that created Milton Keynes in the first place.
It's very sexy vision. I like
it. That's right. Monorail. That's what we want. It's the Simpsons. We want a monorail song.
I want hoverboards. And there was a question in the chat around any chance of East West Rail being extended west to Bristol. Yes, it's being explored. I am not super close to that detail, and I know that if Pete Brunsker would hear, he would be definitely glad that you've asked that question and are shining a light on it, because there is some work happening with Economic Heartland at the moment looking at that case. I think introducing one train an hour, but I don't know if our Economic Heartland are on the call still, but yeah, there is a case, and I can put something in the chat around that, which would be really, really exciting and really, really positive if we could make that happen. Does anyone else want to jump in on that? Who knows the exact details?
I have to say I don't know the exact details because that's our rail lead, James, but it is something that is being trialled at the moment. So I don't know if anyone has put on their timetable or put into any train line kind of thing. There is actually a train that is going directly from Oxford to Bristol, and it is something that is actually being worked up into a full proposal to have an hourly train back from Bristol, stopping at Swindon, into Oxford in hopefully the very near future.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yes, you've reminded me. I think it's a Saturday. Is it just a Saturday service initially, and then the plan for that? You know, if we can make that case and the timetabling work to extend it. And I think this is something that's come up. You know, in Oxford, we've got this Oxfordshire Rail Corridor study that really looks at this bottleneck we have in Oxford, which limits the expansion of services. And if we can get that track I spoke about in, then it unlocks extra capacity for the region. So yeah, we're really keen to kind of remove any bottlenecks and maximise the ability to use the tracks, and to have this onward connectivity to Bristol would be marvellous. So yeah, do use that trial service if you can, just to demonstrate how popular it is. Any other questions? I'm just dialing backwards.
I'm not sure really if there are any other questions, apart from maybe Andy wants to talk about the bridge at Bracknell and that he put in the chat.
Andy, do you?
Yeah, trying to get Network Rail to do anything without taking a big bag of money with you. That's basically the problem you have by the sound of it, Andy.
Yeah,
I think he's gone now, which is a shame.
Okay. It's a good point to raise, though, with the panel, I think, and definitely something that I've identified in the chat. You know, it is a bit of a challenge, and I think this fragmentation of the rail industry does make it quite tricky too, because I'm not a rail bod actually, and I was a bit naive in thinking that, you know, Network Rail were kind of like, you know, the people you would go to when you want a new station, and they would be, you know, they'd hold all the intelligence and they would have, you know, a real drive and to do all of this. And it's not to say they don't, but there's equally information that's held by others that needs to support these cases. And of course, we all have limited resources to be able to do all of the kind of modelling and planning we want to do. And there's expectations that everything has to be, you know, go through this business case process. And just getting that, you know, that strategic level case off the ground takes quite a considerable amount of resources, and to sort of guide it through the path. So I think the guidance that was shared today by Weston Williamson is a really good resource to look at about that, and to sort of really think whether there's any sort of, you know, advice within that can help to sort of pull the right levers and to really demonstrate it. But that's sort of making that case is so valuable, and getting that sort of support behind it, and timing kind of when we do the engagement to build that case, I think can be really challenging too, because there's all these different competing interests and you're trying to work collaboratively with all parties, and you don't want to jump the gun by like drawing attention to a problem and like making life difficult for colleagues when they haven't got the project plan in place. But equally, you want to be hearing those voices, and you want local people to be banging the drum to say, look, this isn't good enough, we need a new bridge, and you know, it's going to enable our business, and what a headache it is. But there is challenges for authorities in kind of instigating that, I think, sometimes, because of all the different politics involved and capacity to manage all the different competing projects going on.
Yeah, well, dealing with the severance of railway lines is nothing new, really, is it? I suppose. But I mean, it is an extraordinarily challenging thing. You're right, and you know, we had, I mean, in my previous authority in Newham, we had Stratford Station, obviously, where some clever individuals decided to build an Olympic Park on what we considered to be the wrong side of the railway line, for those of us that considered traditional Stratford to be the real Stratford. So we now have an issue, which I know that Weston Williamson, I think, certainly have been involved in the past, and may well still be, in trying to solve that severance issue and trying to connect through across the Great Eastern lines at Stratford and join old Stratford to fancy new shiny Stratford. And that is I mean, that is an extraordinary project. I mean, in terms of a master plan area, it covers like half of the Olympic Park. And yeah, as I say, it's a difficult thing to unpick, but it does need that sort of commercial sort of injection of money to get Network Rail to focus their minds on doing something about it most of the time. Even when Crossrail came along, or the Elizabeth line, as I'm supposed to call it, but yes, when Crossrail came along, there were a number of bridges that they had proposed to remove altogether, which we had to actually fight quite strongly to have retained, and in one case in Woolwich, enhanced North Woolwich. Not only were the people of North Woolwich not getting a station, they were also getting the one connection across the railway tracks removed, which, as I say, it was a difficult position to understand. So I can understand the Bracknell situation and why Network Rail would not really want to engage, given that I suspect they think the planning opportunity should have been taken but wasn't. But the trouble is that when you go to a developer and say to them, okay, we need something next to Network Rail property, they immediately, the cost consultants immediately throw their arms up in the air and think, oh my God, working next to the railway, that's going to be an absolute nightmare. There's going to be loads of restrictions. We're going to need specialist contractors, da-da-da-da-da. They will run a mile from having to do anything over an operational railway track. They are very nervous about that for obvious reasons.
It's extremely challenging, isn't it? And it takes a huge amount of coordination with anything crossing the tracks or sort of going beneath the tracks. Something we're experiencing in Oxford at the moment, trying to, this is a rail bridge, so it's a little bit more substantial even, but then it affects all your movement on a key road into the city. They're fraught with difficulty. They've had to remove a bridge at Oxford, a pedestrian bridge, and then put it back in at considerable cost as well. And that, it's not a super well used route, but hugely locally important, and really got a very strong reaction when it was even temporarily removed. And this bridge does have challenges, as Maria's put in the chat, around electrification, that there's potential for bridges to need to be higher. And this bridge, we've been given some indications may not be high enough. So it's making that case for the future of the bridge and making sure that we don't remove any existing connections and also can try and enhance connections. Is something that's really such a key thing when we're looking at master planning around rail areas. And as the panelists have all spoken about, it's such a common thing.
I just wondered if anyone was, just while we're on the subject of this, ramps versus lifts and the ongoing revenue costs of lifts and how they could potentially be met where you have site constrained spaces. You're trying to zigzag a 120-meter ramp into a tiny little footprint. It doesn't always work. But yeah, I mean, in West Ham, the Berkeley Home scheme there, the enhancement to get into West Ham Station is a lift arrangement, with people taking their bikes into the lift, which is fine, I suppose, until the lift stops working.
Yeah.
We've had this discussion on lots of projects, and
I'm sure. Yes,
it's always whenever you're near the station, you want a lift, but when you get further away from the station, it just becomes quite tricky, doesn't it? Because there's the maintenance issue, there's often low usage, and obviously what you want to avoid is these kind of really long zigzagging arrangements, because it's just really bad for passenger experience. No one should have to cross back themselves several times over those kind of lengths that you mentioned. And sometimes we've been fortunate on some projects. There's been a kind of a long enough approach that you can sort of style it out or deal with it through the levels and things. But there are some kind of quite bad projects that you see and you look at it and you think, well, I don't know how I would have dealt with that differently.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite difficult in a lot of cases, isn't it? You've got very limited design options to pick from.
Yeah, I've got an idea. Hoverboards. See?
Yeah. There we are. See,
more than hover.
There's a theme emerging.
But it's a shame Rui's had to leave from our panel, because this is something we've worked on, and I think Alistair has costs to be looked at as well, but something there around, you know, like, do you go under or do you go over? And you know, lifts are really challenging, and of course, yeah, the maintenance cost gets pushed on to locally wherever possible. Ideally, you know, there'd be a sort of commercial interest that can cover the costs for it, but someone has to pay. And can be really, really challenging with the issues you've mentioned of them, you know, being enclosed and also breaking. Yeah, real challenge.
Underpasses, though, I have to say, are also a bit of a challenge because, you know, we have hundreds and hundreds of underpasses in Milton Keynes, and they are repeatedly cited as, you know, trip suppression, basically. Sustainable trip suppression, because people don't feel comfortable in those sorts of environments. And then when we look at, you know, individual costs of under, you know, we've got grid roads, so they're dual carriageways, so admittedly the underpasses are relatively long, but if we look at improving those with new LED lighting and with reflective paint, we're looking at 80 grand per underpass. And, you know, that's a £25 million programme in Milton Keynes alone. You know, just underpasses alone. So you know, underpasses are not a silver bullet either, I can assure you.
No, they can be great, but you raise that really important point that to make them great, they have to have a lot of investment, and they're prone to vandalism as well. Sorry, Alistair, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so just to come in relation to the Cowley pedestrian and cycle bridge, we had these discussions early on. It was probably further complicated on our project in that it's a bridge adjacent to a new station, but it doesn't actually connect directly to it. So there's complication about who maintains it. It wasn't something that, you know, Network Rail wanted to sort of take on. There's also kind of low levels of surveillance, I suppose, to either side. So it felt, if we were able to demonstrate that we could get an alignment that wasn't what you were describing, just basically zigzagging back on yourself constantly, and that could be used relatively easily by bicycles and wheelchair users with good turning circles. If we were able to demonstrate we could do that in ways where you're effectively connecting two routes, and you're working to the desire lines of those routes, more or less, we feel we demonstrate we could do that with a ramped access. So that's what we've taken forward, really.
Thank you, Alistair. That's really helpful. So we've had, you know, still a few people hanging on the call. I'd like to ask if anyone else has any other final questions. If not, I have one last sort of closing remark, which is, you know, it's been really great to get together and to establish other people interested in rail and working along the East West Rail line. We did extend the invite beyond the normal BOBMK network to include some officers working on rail a bit further, going towards sort of Cambridge and Norwich, because of the East West Rail kind of focus and like that importance of that regional connectivity. And Economic Heartland do some great work, you know, connecting officers working on rail, and have a forum for those dedicated officers. But I think it's been really helpful to expand it a little bit and to sort of really draw on kind of transport planners and others who are just interested, authorities or living in the area, who really just want to understand better how rail works. So please do, I think there is a feedback, is that right, Maura? Is there some kind of feedback form? Oh, I can't hear you. I don't know if you're on mute.
Yeah, I'll send a feedback form out to everybody, and thank you all for coming and for your patience with our few glitches that we've had today. And thank you all very much to our speakers. It's been quite a different session for BOBMK because it has been so focused in one area. But I think we sort of found that a little bit when we did biodiversity net gain, and there was some discussion there that, you know, BOBMK could set up a subgroup to maybe discuss that topic. And I feel that possibly this might be another topic, that transport could be another area where BOBMK might set up a subgroup to look at this area. So it's not just, you know, once every sort of 18 months that we cover it, you know, and people can sort of keep touching base with us and checking in on questions that they might have, and we can pull that information through our network and through our contacts and through all the different organizations that we work with to help. And that's really where we should be coming together as a network to, you know, as Amrit was in the chat, to ask, you know, let's reach out to each other and work together. Obviously this Network Rail master plan guide looks very, very useful and very interesting, and, you know, as Penelope said, something that people obviously didn't have in the past and can get a lot of benefit from. So, you know, the more we can publicize these tools and these opportunities, the better. So, you know, if you have any links or any information you want to send through to me that I can share from both presenters and from delegates, then please do. And thank you very much, Kate, for supporting me today and in the run up to this. And I know, you know, a lot of you transport people work together and a lot of our planners work together, but it's good that we're all integrating today. And yeah, thank you all very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really concur with what you said in terms of that guidance and potentially being useful for other sort of master planning and not just in rail, as you know, other sort of transport interchanges. I think there's some really good tools in there. So thank you so much to all our speakers once again, and to our audience. And please do reach out if you'd like to contact any of us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye now.
And our next event, if anyone is still here, will be logistics on the 15th of May. And you'll hear from me for more detail about shared research and development and policy that's going into a lot of that in planning, where I know a lot of planners are struggling to understand policies for warehousing and energy efficiency and that kind of thing. So hopefully that'll be really quite useful for many people. Again, a different touch point to maybe houses and developments, but, you know, useful data for you all to have, really.
Absolutely, that sounds really important.
Yes, that's excellent. Good.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you all
Thanks,
soon.
Laurie. Bye.
Bye.